Hey guys, so this video has been kind of a long time coming. I've been having a ton of requests from women about training their legs, training their glutes, and how to target certain muscles with certain exercises in the lower body. I think this is a topic that a lot of people misunderstand. A lot of people, for some reason it's like we go to the gym and we do squats and we do lunges and we do deadlifts, and there are certain things that are people are more aware of certain exercises than others. So for that reason, today I'm going to split them up into 3 categories based on actual biomechanical motion and explain to you how they target each muscle group. So I'm going to split these up into number 1, lateral motion or abduction, and I'm going to start here because I think it's probably one of the most misunderstood and most neglected parts of a really important leg and glute program. Number 2, hip flexion, and I'm going to go here next because I think this is probably the one that people are most aware of. A lot of this is going to be information that you guys already know, but I'm going to give you a few different ways to actually diversify your program and explain how you can incorporate abduction and lateral motion actually into these hip flexion exercises. And then number 3, I'm going to talk about hip extension, and I'm going to end here because I think that, again, this is probably one of the more neglected areas of a good leg and glute program, and I want it to stick in your brains a little bit, so I'm going to end with that one. So number 1 is lateral motion. I call it lateral motion so that people have a better understanding of what it is, but abduction, right? Abduction is when you move something away from the center. So abduction would be when your leg is coming out to the side, right? And if you think about it, a lot of things that we do in daily life, in fact, all of them almost, are front to back, forward to back. We walk, we lunge, we squat, we deadlift. Everything we do is forward to back, the anterior and the posterior plane, right? So when you open your hips and you move to the sides, this is a new kind of engagement, a very different kind of engagement than you're getting in your daily life. And this is actually really important to building rounded glutes for the ladies. But not only that, also keeping your stabilizer muscles strong and keeping your compound heavy lifts strong as well. I have a couple clients with problems with their knees, right? And I actually find that opening their hips and strengthening their hips allows them to alleviate knee pain because it's referred pain. Their knees have pain because if you have weak hips, when you're doing those heavier lifts, your knees are taking more of the force than they should if your hips are not able to do their job. So I'm going to show you guys a few exercises here of my favorite abduction exercises, help you guys think outside the box a little bit more in terms of the many different ways that you can incorporate these into your workouts. And you'll also see, right, that I incorporate bands and abduction exercises into my hip flexion and hip extension exercises later as well, so you can combine them. So obviously your weighted abduction machine is going to be a great way to add some weight to your lateral motion. That's one of the ones that most of us are already aware of. You can also use the cables to do a side raise and add some weight to it. You can see here that I am putting my hands on the side of my hip to really see and make sure that I am keeping them very engaged. But you can also do this as well with a stretchy band, and the great thing about bands is that the further you stretch them, the more resistance they provide. So it's a continuous resistance and a very different kind of workout. You can do side steps as well, and what I like to call here are kind of like monster walk side steps, a little bit with a squat going in. You want to make sure that your toes are always pointed straight forward or even slightly pigeon-toed to make sure that you're using your hip joint and not turning your feet out. Now this here is a heavier band called a hip circle. It's more like fabric, and you can do pulses, side steps, but unlike you would get with a rubber stretchy band, it's much stronger resistance. It's going to really, really put more weight on your hip joint. For a lot of people, it's actually very hard to do at the very beginning, and you might have to work your way up to it, but I highly recommend grabbing one of these. Now the second type of leg training, right, is hip flexion. Hip flexion is when this joint here, your hip, gets smaller anytime you're bending this leg up. So like I said, most of the things that we do in daily life are already hip flexion. Walking, lunging, squatting, bending down to pick something up, right? So in the gym, your major hip flexion exercises are squats, right? Everybody wants to do squats, and squats are great. Squats are good for your legs, squats are good for your glutes, but I'm going to explain to you why hip flexion is not the only thing, right? I already talked about lateral motion, and after this I'm going to talk about hip extension. But first, I'm going to show you guys a few hip flexion exercises, most of which are different types of squats you can do so you can think outside the box. And if you can't perform certain types of squats, you can have further options, right? Squats, deadlifts, and lunges are your main exercises of hip flexion, right? So double leg, single leg exercises, all of those types of things. And you will see me too incorporating some abduction into my hip flexion exercises. So obviously squats are one of your most popular hip flexion exercises. You can see that my hip joint gets smaller, more acute as I come down, and that the glute squeeze is mainly at the top, which means it's not as optimal for glute engagement, but nevertheless still an amazing leg exercise. You can do regular barbell squats. Here I'm doing a box squat, which is great for people who are learning how to squat and keep their weight in their heels, but you can also take a wider stance and focus more on the glute squeeze on a box squat, or a narrower stance and focus more on the quads. I do think there's a time and a place for Smith machine squats. I prefer, as I'm doing here, to do a pulse with these, but the most important thing to remember with the Smith machine is that your heels need to be in front of your hips. You're actually leaning back onto the bar to make sure you're engaging those glutes. You can also do a regular goblet squat, especially if you're just starting out. This is an excellent exercise, really basic, really excellent. Here I'm doing what I like to call a cable squat, and this allows you to lean back very far, similar to the Smith machine, and it's great for people who have bad knees because it takes pressure off the knees, so definitely try this. It's also great with a pulse and a wider sumo stance. Here I'm doing a sumo deadlift, which is better for glute engagement than other types of deadlifts and really focuses on the side of the hips and that glute squeeze. You can also do a sumo deadlift, not with a barbell, but with a dumbbell, especially if you're starting out. It's a little lighter and allows you to learn on really tucking those hips under, engaging the glutes with a lighter weight. This is a Romanian deadlift. In a Romanian deadlift, I don't allow my hips to come down quite as far towards the ground as they would in a conventional deadlift, which allows me to engage my hamstrings and feel that stretch a lot more in the back of my legs. Here I'm doing another Romanian deadlift with dumbbells. As you can see, there are a ton of different ways you can do all of these things. And here, a Romanian deadlift with one leg with the dumbbell. What you want to remember with all of these Romanian deadlifts is that you're keeping your weight in your heels and pushing your hips back until you feel that really, really nice stretch in the back of the hamstring. Here I'm doing a sumo Romanian deadlift, focusing also on the tucking of the hips and that glute squeeze. It's going to get my hamstrings and my glutes really well together. And again, like with the squat, you can actually do a Romanian deadlift on the cables as well, remembering to keep your weight in your heels, push those hips back, feel the hamstring stretch, but this just adds some variety into your routine. And now, single leg exercises like lunges with a glute kickback are excellent. This is another exercise in hip flexion. But there are many other things besides lunges you can do, especially for glutes. I find step-ups, as I'm doing here, very high step-ups, slowly with your weight in your heels, focusing on that glute squeeze on one glute at a time are excellent, and even better than lunges. And here I am doing a Bulgarian split squat. Again, even more engaging of the glutes than lunges are, but still an excellent exercise of hip flexion for a single leg. And now the last area number 3, is hip extension. And this is something that I think is really misunderstood, right? Now, if you think about, like I said before, if you think about your exercises in hip flexion, the part of the exercise that is working your glutes, if your glutes are the main thing that you want to engage, ladies, the only part of the exercise that is really working your glutes is at the very top when you squeeze them together, right? So if you're doing a squat, when you come to the top and you squeeze, that's when you're engaging your glutes. And that is when your hips are extending, right? Extending. But the main concentric part of the exercise is still the squatting down, the hip flexion. So why, if we have the top of our squat, the part when we are extending our hips, engaging the glutes the most, why do so many of us neglect to do exercises that create the main concentric movement of the exercise to be hip extension? Because this is the most efficient way to engage the glutes, okay? So if you want to work your legs and your glutes, squats and lunges and deadlifts, these are all great things that you can incorporate. However, any kind of hip extension exercise is going to be vital to your, reaching your full potential in engaging your glutes. So this is any type of hip thruster, glute bridge, things like that. Now, a lot of us do glute bridges on the floor, but you will see in these videos that I actually don't do those very often. And the reason is, if your back, either your back is elevated or your back is on the floor and your feet are elevated, right? If one or the other side of your body is elevated, you're gonna get more optimal glute engagement. So you're gonna see me here showing you various exercises that you can do for hip extension, and again, also incorporating some abduction measures, right? By adding bands, so that not only am I doing a hip extension exercise, but I am incorporating some lateral force as well. So obviously your main exercise in hip extension is going to be your conventional hip thruster. And as you can see here, doing these pretty heavy is actually going to be very important, ladies. Doing light hip thrusters is great, but doing very heavy ones, as heavy as you can go, is going to help you to build the size of your glutes a lot. Now, if you don't want to do hip thrusters, you can actually do a Smith machine squat on your knees, and that's a very similar motion. You can see that I have a hip circle around my knees for both of these, which is going to make it much harder for me to push my knees outwards, thus creating more lateral motion and abduction force, which is going to make me engage my hips a lot more and actually make my glute engagement more intense. Also do a lighter hip thruster with a dumbbell if you're just starting out, although like I said, do higher reps on these and try to incorporate as heavy as you can go as well. You can also do a single leg hip thruster by just bringing one leg back and keeping the force on only one glute at a time, really pushing through that heel of the side that you're working exclusively. Now this here is with your feet up. I like to call these like feet up thrusters or frog pumps, right? So you're pushing through those heels, you're on the floor, and it's going to give you a really full extension. Like most things, you can also do these with one leg at a time to engage one glute at a time. I know this looks insane, and damn ladies, the things we'll do to engage our glutes, right? This here is more of what I like to call a frog pump. You have your feet up and you're doing that thruster, but you're coming up, then you're pushing your knees out. The key here is to make sure that you don't let your hips dip down at all when you push those knees out, and you can add a band for more hip and glute engagement as well. You can also do these on a Bosu ball. They're called frog pumps. Push through those heels. Again, the main concern here is making sure that when you thrust out and push those knees out, as your knees come out, your hips cannot dip down at all. You want to keep that tension up and then rotate the knees out. But you can also do these without the rotation, just coming straight up with your knees already out, and you'll feel that deep in the pit of your acetabular joint, which is right on the side of your hips. And of course, most of us are familiar with your classic glute kickback, which you can do as you see here. With a cable machine, you want to make sure that you are really bending forward almost at a 90-degree angle at the hips, pushing through your heels, not allowing your lower back to move or to curve as you're doing this, which disengages the glutes. You can also do this on a machine if you think about it in terms of biomechanics. This is another exercise of hip extension, and adding that band in as well. That is a very different type of engagement. So I hope that made sense to you guys. Not only did I give you a ton more exercises you can do for your leg and glute program, right, so that you have a very well-rounded program to build the glutes, but I've also explained to you biomechanically why these are more engaging, so that you can really focus on that mind-muscle connection in a way that you understand what you're doing when you go in the gym, right? I tell women all the time, a lot of times we go in the gym and we have goals, but the exercises that we're doing are actually arbitrary. We make choices because we're not actually sure what to do. I'll do a little bit of this, I'll do a little bit of that. But if you have specific goals, which one, you should, and that's what I help women do, is set clear, specific goals. And number two, you have to have a roadmap on how to get there, right? No exercise that you do in the gym can be arbitrary. If I'm doing my hip thrusters, I know exactly what muscles I'm working. I know exactly what part of my glute I'm trying to round out. Even based on simple foot placement, right? Simple toe placement, how far apart your legs are. Small details like these make a huge difference in engagement. And if you can build that intuition and feel it in your body as you're working it, you're gonna get much better results. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think. Comment, like, share. Tell me if you try some of these out, and feel free to ask me about certain exercises that might be better or worse for you based on what your goals are.